Good evening, folks. We'll just give everyone a wee minute, just everyone's just sort of coming in. So. Okay, I think everybody is in. Welcome, good evening. Good to see so many people joining us this evening from all parts of Scotland, I see, which is great. Welcome to Scottish Rowing's first sort of part of our Q&A series, giving you a chance to get in behind the scenes at some of our leading rowing programmes. So for the next 90 minutes or so, we're going to be chatting with some of our performance coaches. And we're going to be looking at questions on sort of 3 themes. So we're going to be looking at careers and coaching. We're going to be looking at training and programming. We're going to be looking at athlete transitions. And we'll also have some time at the end to do a bit of freestyle and answer any of the questions that you've maybe got that don't sort of fall under any of those themes. Thanks to those of you who have already submitted some questions in advance. If anyone else has any questions that they want to submit as we go through the next hour and a half, feel free just to type those in using the sort of question and answers function, which you should find at the bottom of your screen. You know, it's a great opportunity this evening to be inquisitive. You know, feel free to ask the questions that you wouldn't normally get the opportunity to do. Especially when we've got everyone on the call. Just to let everyone know as well, we'll be recording the session this evening, and we will make that available to everyone afterwards. So again, if there's a sort of golden nugget that you hear, there's an opportunity for you to go back and listen over that again. Just getting on to this evening, then I guess, you know, Scotland's always sort of punched above its weight in rowing terms, whether that's sort of domestically or internationally. And, you know, high quality coaching has always been at the centre of our success within our clubs. And I'm delighted this evening that we're joined by an expert panel of some of Scotland's leading rowing coaches working in some of our performance partner programmes. Collectively, in recent years, they've contributed to some of the, you know, the best ever performances that we've had at both a Scotland rowing team level and also representing GB. So I'll very quickly introduce them. So first of all, we've got Lewis McCue, who'll hopefully give us a wee wave. Lewis is the head coach of University of Rowing Aberdeen. He's been coaching in Aberdeen for 3 years and has gradually moved into a full-time capacity. He previously rowed on junior and under-23 GB teams and won 2 silver medals at the under-23 World Championships in 2015-2016. He coaches all levels of athletes within his programme, with a particular focus on athletes within his senior squad. And he's also worked with the Scotland rowing team for the last 2 years. Iain Docwra is the lead coach at Glasgow University. Iain took up sport in his youth at Loch Lomond Rowing Club, and he's honed his rowing skills through periods with Edinburgh University, Heriot-Watt University, before settling into a sculling group at Glasgow Rowing Club. A highlight during Iain's rowing career was an invitation to the 2011 GB rowing team final trials in Haaswinkel, Belgium. And prior to coming into rowing, Iain had a background as a sailing coach for many years before landing on the Sport Scotland Coaching Futures programme to start his career as a rowing coach. Tom Young. Tom's been running the British Rowing World Class Start programme at the Strathclyde Park Rowing Club for just over 3 years now, having previously spent several years as part of the coaching team at Edinburgh University. He runs a small programme of around 10 athletes, ranging from complete beginners through to Scotland team level and aspiring GB standards, who in most instances have been brought into the sport from other sports, specifically with the Olympic success in mind. And then finally, we've got Colin Williamson. Colin is the head of rowing at Edinburgh University, and he learned to row at Aberdeen University before moving through Leander Club, Queen's University Belfast and Wolseley Boat Club, over a competitive career that produced 3 Henley Royal Regatta medals and international vests for Scotland, Ireland and Great Britain. He took over as head of rowing at the University of Edinburgh in 2013 and has overseen its ascent to the top, one of the top university programmes in the UK. With 25 GB vests and 13 medals in the last 5 years, as well as historic wins at Henley Royal Regatta and Henley Women's Regatta. So I'm sure you'll agree we've got a pretty experienced panel this evening. I'm going to kick off with our first theme, which is around careers in coaching. And the first question that sort of come in, how did you get into coaching? So, Lewis, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I'm Lewis. Hopefully everyone can hear me well. I guess, like many, I would say I drifted into coaching. I rowed at university in Aberdeen, at RGU, and I guess assisted with doing some coaching of beginners and kind of intermediate level athletes. And then actually I found for a period of time I ended up kind of coaching myself for a little bit up in Aberdeen. And I guess that got me more interested in learning about programming, learning about how to support myself through the trialing process, I guess. And from there, upon finishing rowing at an under 23 level, I decided to take up some kind of hourly coaching at the university program here, and then gradually got more interested in, I think coaching is very much, in some ways, it's very much like rowing, that I have found that I'm almost addicted to doing it, and I enjoy it. So that's kind of how I got in and continued coaching.
Thanks, Lewis. Iain, what about yourself?
Yeah, so I was a rower as well. I did a couple of years as junior rowing, then university rowing, and then went on to try and do some under 23 GB stuff. After I retired, I kind of drifted away from rowing a little bit, and I went back to being a sailing coach. I sailed before I rowed, so our way, Scotland, were looking for a couple of instructors, a couple of coaches to help out for a couple of years, and I jumped in and did that. It's very seasonal. We only really coach sailing in the summer, and in the winter I ended up in boatyard work. So it's very much split seasonally what I did. And then lucky enough, Sport Scotland and Lee came along and put a job off, not a job offer, but pushed me to go for the Coaching Futures programme, something John Higson from Edinburgh went through 3 years before me. And Lee suggested that I throw a job application for that. I did, and lucky enough I was awarded the programme. It's a great 3-year programme. It takes ex-athletes and puts them on a career in their sport. And I couldn't have done it without it. I needed a push. I needed something to pay the bills as I learned how to be a coach, and it's a great programme. I was put straight into Glasgow University 4.5 years ago now to shadow Andy Barton at the time. And from there just stepped up and up and up every year until I'm sat here today as head of Glasgow.
Thanks, Iain. Tom, your journey's a little bit different, I suspect.
Yeah, and I almost forgot to unmute myself as well there. Yeah, mine's a bit different because it started in a different country. So I first started rowing at uni in Liverpool, where I was doing a sports science undergrad. And I mostly got into that. Partly I'd always wanted to after watching the Athens Olympic final for the men's four. It'd always been something I wanted to do. And mostly got into it just because I wanted a sport to try and put my sports science degree to use in. And gradually, so first off went into clubs to see what it was doing. My first actual club I visited happened to be the World Class Start programme in Manchester, just because it was close to where I originally lived. So it's gone full circle since then. But then they just sort of guided me to different places, visited clubs, joined them, so started rowing on the side and helping out a little bit within clubs. And then as I went through my degree and into postgrad, just doing a little bit more, less of just helping out and being numbers behind supporting juniors and more sort of coaching. Did a little bit of sort of physiology S&C, And then coming out of it after getting my postgrad MSc, applied for a job where Colin was kind enough to give me the internship job at Edinburgh Uni. So crossed the border and haven't been allowed out since. So I spent a few years in Edinburgh as the intern, and then think of the title, just development coach at Edinburgh Uni. And then 3 years ago, moved 10 yards across to the next boat bay and became lead of the world-class start programme up here in Scotland, specifically at Strathclyde Park.
Thanks, Tom. Colin, obviously you sort of transitioned quite quickly from being an athlete into coaching. How do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Well, good evening, everyone. To start with, I guess I first started coaching as a means to an end. I was trying to be an athlete. I was rowing at Leander Club, and I didn't have any money. So how was I going to make some money? What did I know about? The only thing I really knew about at the time was rowing. The pink outfit gave me a bit of kudos with some of the local clubs in Oxford, at the sort of college rowers there. They'd pay a bit of cash to go up and teach their third eight how not to hit the bank. So I started off doing that, and I just realised I actually quite enjoyed it. Not only was it providing a little bit of money to keep me going, but it was also a good way of the skills I was learning in the boat. I was able to sort of reinforce them by trying to explain them and to athletes on the water as well. And I thought that made me a better rower as well. That theme probably continued. I went back to university at Queen's University in Belfast, and I coached at your old school, Lee, at Methodist College. So different again, it was coaching juniors, so learned a little bit about what coaching juniors is all about. And then finally I moved to London, and I was rowing at Molesey, and again I was just looking for a bit of cash, and that was probably my first contracted job, where I was part-time coach at Latimer Upper School. Then myself and my wife were moving back to Scotland. She had a job back here. I had no idea what I was going to do. I'd quit rowing and very grandly put that on Facebook that I was quit rowing, as you do. And I remember getting a message about a couple of hours after I'd put that up by one Mr. Boucher saying there's a job going up here in Scotland, maybe you should apply for it, now you're not rowing. And I landed in Edinburgh. So that's my journey so far.
And I bet you're delighted to be back, Colin. Delighted
Absolutely.
to take that choice. I know. So, Colin, I'll just come back to you then. I know we had this sort of conversation briefly the other day, but how important is your first coach in rowing in terms of setting the tone for your own coaching career?
Yeah, I mean, they're hugely important. They're your first introduction to the sport. I think the biggest thing that keeps us in the sport is whether we enjoy it and whether we progress in it. So that's the key points for a first coach. Are you enjoying the process of what you're doing, and are you getting better, and are you seeing achievement? And you've got this window of opportunity with a new athlete where everything's fresh and everything's new, and you're painting the canvas for them. And if you get that painting right straight away, you hook them in for life. So I owe a huge debt of gratitude to my first coach, who was quite well known. Maybe a lot of people on this call will know him, Charlie Simpson. He introduced me to the sport back at Aberdeen University, and a lot of the stuff that maybe I produce now in rowing came from those days, 20 years ago now. His sort of approach to coaching, his approach to science, his approach to enjoying the sport, his approach to progress. I think if I'd had any different coach in my first year rowing, I probably wouldn't have done what I did in the sport, but also I don't think I would have enjoyed it. And I probably wouldn't be sitting here as a coach now. I'd probably be doing something else.
If we just look sort of moving then on in that sort of coaching journey, obviously somebody's looking relatively new to coaching, looking to progress. What advice would you have for sort of gaining coaching experience early on, particularly whenever you don't necessarily have any sort of coaching qualifications to start off with? So, Lewis, do you want to? Oh, Iain.
Yeah. So sorry, Lewis. Let's jump in here. I guess I was lucky that I had the time to go and shadow other coaches through the coaching program. Because people don't know it isn't just rowing; it's a number of sports across Scotland. So I was on with a triathlete, judo player, a guy playing boccia, and a swimmer sort of thing. So we just went into their environment and watched them try and coach, and then like their master coaches try and coach. So I think that's a really good way. That there's no pressure. Just come on, sit down, sit in pool. Like I sat in poolside. Like I don't know a lot about it, but I got a lot of how Andrew Woodroff's conducted himself and how he held himself and how he how he engaged with like 30 little kids in the poolside. That's manic, but I learned a lot from that. And it's even people I've said like Andy Barton before. My first couple of weeks, months was just following and just seeing what they saw on the boats, and I asked questions, and it's just that discussion of someone that already knows their expertise and just chatting about it. I think chatting is a great thing. I think as coaches, I don't think anyone on this call would ever say like no to someone coming to shadow them. I think we'd all love for more people like younger coaches or, yeah, cool.
I was going to back you up on that, Iain. I think maybe sometimes coaches, I'll put myself out there, can look quite unapproachable, and maybe we look a bit scary at times. We don't mean to be. Absolutely, 100%. If anyone wanted to say, I want to come and spend some time on the launch, absolutely welcome. And that's a two-way thing as well, because we can still learn stuff from people who may think they're less experienced as well, but you can always learn from someone, whether you think you're coaching at a higher level than them or not.
Absolutely, and that's that's first year of my coaching futures, just getting involved, getting your hands dirty.
And I guess a sort of along similar lines, we've got a question here about for coaches in smaller clubs who are maybe looking to progress their sort of coaching career in a sort of larger program. How can they go about getting experience of larger programs if they've been coaching smaller programs to start with? So.
I'm sure you'll make all our contact details available after this league.
Yeah. And are there opportunities within your programs, I guess, for additional volunteer coaches or part-time coaches? How does that look?
Yeah, I'll just quickly. Yes, yeah. We, when all this is over and we get beginners back, we're gonna have a bigger spread of abilities here at Glasgow. Beginners and beginner twos who didn't get that much racing last year. Yeah, we'll happily have anyone on a bike or a lunch. Lewis, how about yourself?
Yeah, so in Aberdeen, we run a kind of team of beginner coaches, volunteer coaches, largely working with our beginners and some working with our seniors. And actually, a lot of the crews that we have competing at Henley Women's, anyone that competes at Henley Royal, a lot of them have learned to row at the programme in Aberdeen. So for us, it's very crucial having volunteer coaches. And actually, they will spend a lot of time sitting in a launch with me, coaching and me watching and feeding back, but also sitting in a launch listening to what I'm saying. And for me, that's the best way to learn, is by learning from other people. I think the point about maybe a lack of qualifications, I do see a value in qualifications, and a lot of jobs it's required to have them. But the best learning you'll do is informal learning, where you're working with other people. That's where you will learn the most out in rowing.
One other thing that you can do is just to gain a bit of experience with other programs and maybe kill two birds with one stone. And this is something we've offered up at Edinburgh, and some people have taken us up on it, is if you're coaching maybe a smaller program, you want to bring your crews to come and compete or train alongside the Edinburgh crews and then share a launch with us. That's something we've done in the past, where people have come and they've done some training alongside us. We've shared the coaching launch and we share ideas. So then the coaches are exchanging a bit of information, but the athletes are getting a bit of that as well. So you can kill two birds with one stone. And that's an offer that's open to anyone in Scotland, certainly with our programme. If you want to come down to Strathclyde Park, get your crews involved in our training and come out in the launch as well, then and share some ideas, then that offer is there.
Yeah, I'll back that up. Colin offered that opportunity to me early in my career, and it's I thought Colin's a big scary guy, but it was really useful. He's not.
A point I'd probably just jump in and make there is obviously there are times when I think particularly for people in sort of club programs and you're looking to try and operate maybe at a level above of what's available in your program itself or in your club, and sometimes you've probably got to make the decision in terms of, okay, maybe I need to miss a weekend of training to go and do something out with what I normally do. And that's something that I'm sure everyone here has had to make a decision of before. Just one example, even just for me personally, earlier this year, I went away to Sierra Nevada with the GB under-23s and development group. And that meant actually leaving my athletes behind either in Scotland or away on a world-class start camp over the same period. And sometimes if you want to see what's going on at a level above you, you've just got to get out there and actually sometimes do what's best for you to do that, whether that's just something you can immediately take and apply into your own setting, or whether it's actually looking 2, 3, 4 years down the line. And there's, you know, again, plenty of people to talk to, obviously various levels that you're at. You can speak to Shep for the under 23 specific stuff, Aid and Dan for the junior stuff. And a big one as well is probably get yourself to trials if that's the sort of level that you're looking at that you've got no experience of. They're always looking for helpers down at trials and things like that, so you can actually get yourself to events that you might not necessarily need to be at, but you can get yourself down there. And, you know, even if it was just someone wanted to go and see what it's like at Henley, or, you know, in the crew boat tents and stuff like that, that's probably somewhere where the coaches in this group can help as well if you chat, and they'll probably give you an idea of what it looks like in case you've never managed to get there yourself and see what it's like at that certain event.
Okay. I think so one of the things that we've had in is, with the benefit of obviously hindsight and the benefit of the experience that you guys have all now got in sport, you know, what one bit of advice would you give to yourself when you were starting out on that sort of coaching career, based on the experience that you've had so far? So
I think the advice I would probably give is, don't be afraid to try something a little bit different. Don't be afraid to try different things and work things out for yourself. Me doing exactly what someone else does in a different city or in a different program isn't necessarily going to work. You can't carbon copy something and expect it to work every time. You've got to be willing to experiment and try something different. So I think that's something which I would tell myself and tell any other young coaches: just be prepared to try and kind of work out what worked well and what didn't work well based on review of that.
Yeah, what I would say is probably not massively different from Lewis, but mine's probably more along the lines of, don't be afraid to look stupid. When you're a new coach and you're speaking to someone who's, you know, arguably operating at a higher level, a lot of people probably feel like they need to try and look like they know what they're talking about, and they don't want to ask a stupid question. They don't want to look stupid doing something silly. Like, the big thing is, don't be afraid to do that. I think everyone in coaching, particularly in rowing coaching, is very accustomed to people making mistakes and getting things wrong. And we're always more than happy to share this sort of information. So don't be afraid of asking stupid questions and looking like you're not the best coach in the world, because nobody's really judging you and everyone's happy to explain from the most basic to the most advanced topics. We still quite regularly discuss all the really basic things. And we always then go into too much detail and discuss the advanced things that we probably don't fully understand. So don't be afraid to be missing something in the basic end of the spectrum.
I'd probably just have two very simple points that I'd tell myself back when I started coaching, which was, don't put your ambitions as a coach onto the athletes. It's their careers, not yours. And the other thing is, don't assume that every athlete will act in the same way that you acted when you were an athlete. Every personality is very different. Everyone has very different needs. I think I was quite a tough athlete. I didn't really need the kind of arm around the shoulder type approach. I just got on with it. Didn't mind a little bit of criticism, but I've learned over the years to try and soften up a little bit, and everyone's not the same. So yeah, that would be the 2 points I'd make.
So the next one's a question I guess I get quite a lot, and, you know, do you need to be a successful rower to be a successful coach? Iain, what's your thoughts on that?
No, I don't believe you do. There's probably quite a lot of examples, and when I'm finished talking, Tom can probably back me up of how many successful coaches there are across different disciplines of sport. But personally, if anyone knows my background, I was most effective sat in a single scull on my own. The joke around the Clyde was, I didn't know what one blade was, I didn't know how to use it. And now I am in a university program where predominantly we do sweeping. So even personally for me, I probably when I first started, I probably listened to those people saying, "Oh, Doc, you can't sweep," and I probably shied away from teaching sweeping. But it's not. As long as you've got a plan in your head, you watch something, you try and measure it, and you try and act upon it, or like give drills towards it. And if you see a change or progression and feed that back to the crew, that's all coaching is. And then we replan again. So it's, no, you don't have to be a good rower. Like it might help in the first week, but after that, it's how you get on with people and how you write a trajectory of progress.
I actually think sometimes it helps if you haven't been the best rower. One of the things I've discussed with other coaches is, or say you ask Ronaldo how he takes a free kick and sticks it in the top corner, or you ask Federer how he manages to place a backhand down the line. I don't know if they'd be able to articulate that very well. They've just got that natural talent and they can just do that. So if you went into the GB team and you ask Alex Gregory how he manages to place his blade in so accurately, I don't know he's going to be able to explain that. It's just something that he has the ability to do. So sometimes if you're a coach and you've had to work out these problems yourself, you're going to have a lot more sort of affinity with your athlete because they're going through the same problems that you did. So actually, if you were able to do it, and sometimes you can't understand why an athlete can't because you could just do it, so actually having worked through those problems yourself is a real plus to your coaching.
I would just kind of echo what Colin's saying. I guess I've worked with a load of different coaches from different ends of the country. And actually, I'd probably say the majority of those coaches that I've worked with weren't particularly successful at rowing. Looking at some of the best coaches in the UK, and they were worse than the rowers they're coaching. So that gives a perfect example of it, that you don't have to be that good to at rowing to actually coach well.
Thank you. We have had our first live question in this evening from Mike Martin, and quite a relevant one given we've got an all-male coaching panel this evening. Any sort of thoughts from the panel, and I guess how we could encourage more women in the coaching?
Yeah, well, I say yes. I don't have the answer to that, I don't think. But I've had the pleasure of working with several female coaches over my time. One of the first coaches that I worked with in Liverpool was female, obviously, so picked up a lot of my first things from her, and I've worked with quite a few since then, and I'm still working with quite a few, and lucky enough to have quite a few of them in the attendees for this call as well, so I certainly couldn't get away with saying anything bad about them either. But yeah, I don't know if I have the answer to that, but it's clearly something that we need to have a look at, and how we can help in any way. I'm more than open to hearing what we can do.
We've had 3 female coaches in the program since I arrived at Edinburgh, and they've all added a huge amount. We don't have any at the moment, which is disappointing. But I guess this question could go a little bit wider and get a little bit political about how do we encourage women into any career and make it more manageable. I think one of the traits I've noticed is that we've had a lot of young female coaches through our program, and that's been great. I guess what we've got to think about is what's the longevity of a career in coaching for a woman? What are things like? Traditionally, there's things like childcare, etc., that tend to move into their department, rightly or wrongly. And is rowing conducive to being a mother? I don't know. It's difficult with the traveling and the different hours and things like that. We've got to have a little look at the environment about how we make that easier. But I think that's probably a question for a wider society, and maybe a panel of 4 rowing coaches aren't best placed to be answering.
So the next one's quite an interesting one, and I'm going to go to Iain first because it's come in from one of your athletes. What are the appealing aspects of being a coach? We obviously hear a lot about the work that you guys put in terms of obviously making sure our rowers have a training program to follow, make sure you get to races and competitions and everything else. There's obviously a lot of hours go into the job. What are the appealing aspects?
Yeah, I think there's heaps. Again, I think probably around this panel quite similar is, one, we can't sit still is one of the things. Like, if you watch any of us, this would be the longest 90 minutes any of us sat still all day. And there's always something going on. It's always something different in rowing coaching. I really like the rhythm of the rhythm of the year as a whole. Like, you know, we build for the winter. You know, we get excited about the spring, we get excited about the summer racings, and then we really, you know, see the fruits of the work through the summer. I really like that as my year to follow that sort of structure. And week as well. It's, you know, I've got blocks of the week all blocked out, which I know I need to be, where I need to be, when I need to be there, and what I need to do there. And I think it's just, there's enough structure, but there's so much other stuff, problem solving going around it, which I really enjoy. I think rowing coaching is just about finding a solution to problems and interacting with the rowers to solve those problems. Yeah, we never have a dull day or a day without a couple of laughs. Lewis, the same for you up in Aberdeen?
Yeah, I would
bright
agree. Yeah, I would agree exactly what you're saying. I mean, the enjoyable aspects of it is, for a start, I chose rowing as a hobby because I like the look of it, and that's not changed. I love rowing. I enjoy watching rowing. So that's partly why I'm coaching, and that's one of the best things about it. But what Doc was saying about kind of building through a season, that's really an exciting project. I think we're not the ones that are going to be achieving those medals or whatever, but we're still doing something to help that. And I think you don't often get that much satisfaction in other jobs. So it's a privilege to be able to call coaching rowing a job for me. Alongside that, you get to travel a lot. You travel up and down the country, and yes, you're slumming it in a truck for 12 hours down to London, but actually you're getting to go to London loads of times a year. We go up in the Highlands for a training camp and things like that, which I wouldn't get the opportunity to do in another job.
Oh, well, number one obviously has to be the ability to wear shorts every day of the week if you choose to. That's by far and away number one, which some coaches abuse more than others, that right? But a big one for me is I'm quite sort of obsessive compulsive over some things. So I like having sort of long-term projects that you can work on, and it's this continual technical mastery sort of thing, which we often sort of have this idea of we're trying to achieve perfection, even though, you know, perfection probably doesn't exist, but we're always sort of searching for that. And it's this sort of never-ending goal that we have to hit is what's quite exciting for me. Probably accused of being boring by plenty of other people in the world, but that's where I get my kicks. So,
well, in terms of getting your kicks, I'm a hugely competitive person. Always have been, was as a rower, and this is a way of still doing that without sitting on an ergo myself for 12 sessions a week. I just love the buzz of competition, win or lose at any level as well, and I get to keep doing that, and I'll get to keep doing that until I'm 60 or something like that. I don't know if I'm going to misquote him here. I think it was Mark Twain said, "If get a job you enjoy and you'll never work a day in your life." I don't think that could be truer than it is for rowing coaching.
I think, to throw my tuppence worth in this one, I think anyone who has the privilege to work in something that they would do for free as their hobby, I think is really fortunate. And I think everyone I'm looking at here is certainly, I think, falls into that category. We started off because we're passionate about what we do, and it moves from there. I'm going to move the discussion on to sort of training and programming. Thanks for Mike for his question that's come through already. If you do have any questions on training and programming, now's the time to get those in to us. And thanks again to those who have submitted some questions in advance. So I'm just going to kick off with a question that looks at how we, I guess, manage a program where we have groups with different stages of development within the program. Should the program be targeted towards the lowest level in order to bring everybody up to the same point, or the average skill level amongst the group? So Lewis, are you happy to kick us off in this one?
Yeah. So I guess with experience in the University Rowing Aberdeen program, we have a program where we get some athletes that have competed at junior international level, but we also get about 75%, 8% of the athletes at a beginner level and kind of grow through our program. So for me, the best, any session can be adapted. So If you write a program which is designed for the top athlete in your group or designed around that level of competition, you can adapt every single session in that program to suit different abilities. So my recommendation is having a group of athletes all training together will increase the ability of the people at the bottom at a faster rate than if you segregate them all off into different groups. So learning from athletes at a higher level is, for me, really crucial part of this. So programming can be relatively individual, but it's got to fit the needs of the best athletes and the worst athletes at the same time.
There's actually something I've picked up. Since I stopped rowing properly, I've started doing a bit of CrossFit, and it's actually something I've picked up out of there. Is the way they scale their sessions is actually really quite clever. It gets a bit of a bad press sometimes, CrossFit, but you'll go in and every session has different scaled options on where your ability is. We started doing stuff like that in rowing as well. So if for example, I've got athletes that might come in and do 90 minutes of GT2 on an ergo, I'm not going to make someone who's just come out of a school program do that. So we have the scaled version, which would be maybe 3 by 20 minutes and do 60 minutes instead. There's exactly what you're saying. There's ways of scaling sessions that are appropriate to the athlete's physicality. It's more difficult when we start getting into crew boats, because obviously we can't scale a session if everyone's in an 8 together. I guess people get different things out of that session, and it's about queuing up to the different athletes in that crew what they're going to get out of it. It's very difficult. If you've got a very experienced athlete and you tell them you're rowing with some novices today, how do you sell that session to them? I sell it to them as, this is leadership. This is your opportunity to bring other athletes with you, show yourself as a leader of the group. For the less experienced athlete, it's like, right, this is your opportunity to learn from people who are a lot better than you. So it's about just how you frame that session to those individuals is quite important.
No, I totally agree. I think that's something which I'm probably getting better at now, and actually during this lockdown period of offering alternative sessions, it's making me think about how to scale it, only just because of an equipment point of view, but maybe I should do it sort of a, like, how long they've been rowing sort of view as well. I like to say a lot of things we do in pre-season is, you know, I'm sure whoever's at the top isn't the top for everything. So, no, just because the top of the ergo doesn't mean the top of the weights, doesn't mean the top of like a cross training session. So I think what we concentrate more in pre-season is trying to give everyone their day. So yeah, you know, the whole heavyweight, that's pointing at Colin or Lewis, or the lightweight divide of, yeah, like half session of rowing, half session of running. It's, yeah, the heavyweights get away in the erg, and then we lightweights like me, like, chase them down. And it's just trying to get a level playing field through a whole week rather than just session by session. I think it's important to show everyone they are very, very good and very at something.
Yeah, I think the other part of this question was, you know, I guess how is that best achieved though? We're making sure that, you know, we're not alienating, you know, either the top end of the group who's got the potential to be pushed on a wee bit further, or the bottom end who's maybe struggling to keep up. Tom, any thoughts on?
Yeah, obviously my program runs a little bit differently to the other three, so I suppose that's exactly what my program's based around. I have a much more varied ability range within my group, albeit in much smaller groups, so that adds the problems in that I can have a beginner who's not capable of going more than 10 yards off the pontoon, as well as an athlete who's getting ready for, you know, trials, final trials, something like that. So the big thing is obviously it brings a difficulty to it, but we try and just make sure that they're doing the same sessions at the same time. And when it comes to things, you know, they can, you know, maybe a total beginner who's 14 years old obviously can't do 18k of UT2, but they can row for 2 or 3 minutes alongside someone who is, which is great in the ergo. And then the same thing can be applied on the water as well. Occasionally, if I'm on the water and I've got beginners and more senior athletes, we're obviously spend most of our time in singles whenever the weather at Strathclyde Park allows it. You can have them all on the water at the same time, and you can say, look, this person's about to row past you. See how long you can keep up with them or keep ahead of them, things like that. And then, you know, they're not going to row 4K loop around with the fastest athlete on the water. So they just come back to the pontoons, try and do some skills, trying to develop some little tactics, figure something out, and then race again the next time they come around for a loop. But, you know, you can all sort of stay on the water for 70 minutes at a time, 90 minutes at a time, whatever you need to, and just try and make yourself a better rower at that point. Obviously, yeah, the crew boat aspect comes into it, but that's where, like Colin said, you can use your more senior athletes to look after your newer athletes, not as babysitters, but as, look, your challenge for this 90 minutes is actually, can you teach someone how to row and actually think more critically about what you're doing to develop yourself at the same time? So it's how can your partner in the boat or your crew in the boat get better at rowing from what you're teaching them, but also can it have a benefit for you? And I know I can't remember who said it, but someone, it was Colin, said that was sort of how he got into coaching as well, is that he was coaching and it made him a better rower. And I'd be remiss to say that although I wasn't a great rower when I was rowing, I'm probably a better rower now, having not been in a boat since, just because I can critically think, and I've probably demonstrated so many strokes in my lifetime without actually holding an oar now.
Do you think that's just, Tom, because of the process that you go through as a coach in terms of, you know, systematically working through how you solve a problem? Does that sort of help your thought process?
Yeah, I think that links back to, if anyone's read Bounce by Matthew Syed, it's about this purposeful practice idea. You've got to be really in the moment for any sort of practice and any training to count. You can't drift through and just sort of slog through the miles without considering it. You've actually got to be really focused on what you're doing, and coaching is a really good way of doing that. You know, and I think there's a little snippet from the book Assault on Lake Casitas, where they talk about they used to get on an ergo, leave the handle down, and they just used to pretend to row rate 36 down a 2K course. And it's just this sort of mental rehearsal thing. You don't even have to take strokes to get better at taking strokes. You can, if you're just thinking about it and thinking critically about how you do things, how things play out, and then how the boat, the blades, the system all works together, you can improve that way.
Okay. Kind of leads us in a little bit to our sort of next question, which will maybe have a slightly different perspective developed depending whether we're in a university environment or a world-class start environment. But how effective are group training programs compared to those which are individually tailored?
I guess I'll kick off with this one. It's something that's probably evolved at Edinburgh over the years. When I first arrived in 2013, I think the athletes were all of a very similar level. So actually, the one training program was fine, and it took the vast majority of people with it, and it improved people. I think if I fast forward to where we are now, and we literally have people in our senior squads who learned to row last year at the beginners, and we have people who won gold medals at under 23 world championships last year as well. So that the ability gap is vast, and now to give them exactly the same training program wouldn't work. But I think the question was about, does a group training program work? It does create culture as well. It's not all just about the science when you're doing a training program. It's not all about the science and the physiology and how you move it on. A lot of it's about the culture and the enjoyment of what you're doing. So Edinburgh, we developed a new gym just a couple of years ago where we now have 50 ergos in one gym. And people can be training in there who've only rowed for 3 or 4 months and be sitting behind someone who's sitting there with a load of world medals under their belt. And that just builds part of the culture of the club. And it takes both athletes along. It takes the inexperienced athlete gets the benefit of training with people who are better than them. And then the other athlete, the experienced one, they might be having a tough day. They don't really want to train. But when you're sitting in the middle of a group with 40, 50 people around you who are doing the same work, and they're in the same place as you, it really just carries you through. So group training programs, yeah, you've got to tailor things individually for the physiology, but actually there's so much benefit to training as part of the group, the culture, the friendship, the camaraderie, all the other stuff that we really enjoy about our sport comes from that group training program.
Tom, did you?
Yeah, sorry, forgot to unmute myself. Yeah, I'd sort of echo what Colin's saying, even as someone who, is obviously very heavily on the individual side of things. Almost wondering if that question was meant to be slightly provocative to a little argument between us. But obviously very individual in terms of how we do things, but I'm quite open with my athletes that we're trying to do that, but be as cohesive and work together as we can. And like I said before, how we try and do similar sessions together so that they're not feeling like they're alone and just having to go through this on their own. And even though we're a much smaller group, we try and get exactly that same thing that Colin was just mentioning. And likewise, I'm sure the others will say that they try and do everything that they can to individualize within a big program. I try and group everything together as much as I can in an individual group. So it's a little bit of both. It can be very useful.
On the sort of webinar this evening, we've got a range of athletes, all parts of their sort of rowing journeys. We've got a question in about sort of masters athletes. What are the most important issues facing masters athletes aspiring to top level rowing performance, and what particular training aspects should they consider including or changing within their program? Colin, you're kind of our resident coach / masters rower. I don't know, do you have a thought on this?
Yeah, I'm the old man of the group. Yeah, so I started doing a bit of masters rowing after I took up the coaching role at Edinburgh, and I guess I've had some observations about crews that go fast in masters rowing and crews that don't, and why. So if we take it back to the principles about what makes a boat go fast, it's length in the water, it's power, and it's rate. So there's 3 factors that make the boat go fast. And I think 2 of them get severely impacted when you get to a masters level. I think masters level athletes tend to row quite short and tend to get shorter as they go up the age categories. That's part of the aging process. And I think power drops off quite significantly as well. So I think they're the 2 biggest factors that are drop-offs when you get to masters rowing. I think the endurance, what we do, we build up this endurance base when we're competing when we're a bit younger, and I think that carries through into masters level. And I still see some fantastic erg scores from guys I row with who are 40s, 50s, producing really good scores that would be competitive. But if we went over the shorter distances, it's that power drop off that's really quite significant. So in terms of how would you go faster as a masters rower? Stretch lots so you can actually row long. If you row long, you'll go a lot quicker. And I think a lot of masters athletes row very short. And the other thing is power. I think someone like Tom might want to jump in on the science behind this, but power drops off a lot quicker than endurance does, and significantly so in masters athletes. So I would work on power. And that means I don't want to get people out there lifting weights who've never lifted weights before, but a little bit of gym work or a little bit of resistance work, a little bit of power stroke work in the boat will go a long way. And that's even more significant when you think masters rowers race over 1,000 meters, not 2,000 meters, where that shift in the energy systems needed is more towards the power end as well. So if you want to go fast as a masters rower, I'd say stretch so you can row longer and do some resistance work so you can it's who drops off the least, I think, rather than who gets strong when you're a masters rower. That's what I've learned anyway.
Yeah. Great insight. Thank you, Colin. Tom, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I agree with what Colin says. Yeah, like he was saying, you sort of tend to hold on to the aerobic side more just because your aerobic endurance tends to peak a lot later in life. So you'll find that's where you look at sort of, ultra marathon athletes and stuff like that. They tend to be a little bit older. And there's plenty of research coming out these days that there is sort of use it or lose it in terms of muscle mass and muscle function in the older people and older athletes. So yeah, in terms of that, that's where obviously the drop off in power comes. And there's lots of suggestions coming through these days that you need to do some form of resistance training if you want to not only keep muscle mass and be powerful, but just for general health as well. It reduces risks of various things. We're getting into very non-sporting segments now, but in all aspects of life, as you get older, lifting weights is not a bad thing. And I'm sure that's the sort of trend that we'll see over the next few years. It's going to get more and more common for people to do that, and even more so in rowing, because it's probably just keep trying to do weights if you can.
Tom, if you just hold your thoughts on that one, because I know we're going to come on to talking about weights in a minute. I'm going to move to one of the sort of live questions that's come in from Amber, and the question was, what would be the optimal weekly training time for beginners? So I know obviously everyone here is involved in coaching and overseeing beginner programs. Lewis, do you want to give us your thoughts on that?
I think I would answer that with a question, like many great people do, is what level of beginner are they? Are they for someone that's never sat in a boat, or are they someone that's been rowing for 6 months and in a beginner program? But all I can do is maybe give an insight into what our beginners would do. Is that we would normally run a kind of learn to row period where they'll get offered a number of sessions over a few weeks, and then they'll then move into a beginner squad, and they might start off doing 3 or 4 sessions a week. And we wouldn't push them to do more than that. And not all of those sessions would be on an ergo or on the water. We would introduce mobility work and strength and conditioning work at a very basic level to help kind of develop general athleticism. And what I would advise for anyone looking at coaching beginners or a beginner themselves is maybe have a look at the GB Rowing development guide that they've put together. Or sorry, British Rowing, not GB Rowing. I personally have had a look at it, and I think it's a very good model to follow. It might not be exactly what we would do, but it's a good basis to start from, and it gives people an idea of how to progress through the sport, both at a skill level and an athleticism level. Tom, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as Lewis says, like, you just want to try and get them in boats as often as you can when you're a beginner. I think the big thing that I've found is that when you're, obviously it's the water sessions we're mainly concerned with. There's a little bit of technical work on the ergo, which most people will start with, but that's relatively simple to pick up compared to the water stuff. The big thing for me is that if sessions are sporadic, their progress is just completely reduced. If you can get sort of chunks of quite solid amounts of sessions, even if there's a bigger gap, then you get a lot better progress through that. So if you're only getting on the water, once a week, let's say for your first term at uni or first term at school, you'll find that you make a big step forward in the 90 minutes or so that you're on the water and jump almost entirely the way back next week when you get in a boat again. Whereas if you can do something a little bit more like sort of 2 sessions a day for a 5-day block, you'll find that by the end of that 5 days, it's really good and it's quite sticky. I'm sure there's someone much more adept in sort of psychology and skill acquisition than me that probably knows the exact terminology and numbers on this sort of stuff. But I found, particularly when I get beginners in, if they're at school or uni, I try and make sure that we've got a half term or, in the summer, something like this where we can really try and jam in quite a lot of sessions in a short space of time, because they'll tend to just stay a bit stagnant if not. And if you can get a big bunch together, they just sort of leap and bound much further than you'd expect. I know there's a lot of logistical issues trying to do that, especially with volunteers and big uni programs and school programs that only have PE once a week, things like that. But it's a tip that I find works. So sorry if that's not helpful.
No, I think that's been great. I think that the big thing with beginners as well is just making sure that there's been a conversation about the ambition that they have, and what they understand what they're getting themselves into when they sign up. And I've got a question that we've had in, and how can I improve my base fitness? And obviously, we know very little about this particular athlete, but Doc, what do you do in terms of your program, just looking around general aerobic conditioning?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's a good question. It's it's something which is quite individual. For us, it's just consistency. I think we'd all agree on that. It's just doing. It's not monotonous, but just being consistent with our training. So not level intensity, but not doing too much. Knocking ourselves flat for 2 days and then spending 3 days recovering and getting over it. As rowing, there is a lot of UT2 low intensity stuff in it, and I think that's got to be the base. Like, if we're building a pyramid, we need to build a big wide base, and we can do that in the boats, on the ergos, or cross training on bikes. I think if you're new to it, like Tom says, and Lewis with the beginners, is let's not overstrain one aspect of that. Okay, let's utilize, if you've got beginners that like running, let's let them go for a run, or people that are got nice bikes for cycling, let's do low intensity work on that. We do have to hit the other systems. So in rowing, we talk about UT2 and UT1, and then like AT stuff. I think it's just a program that's well put together to get those sessions in every week consistently. Colin, I think you want to jump in a bit more on that.
I was going to back you up on when you said consistency. I think that's really key. I'd far rather, the best athletes are the ones who train consistently and miss the least training. So I think some people have a habit of doing loads of training for a week, training really hard, think they're doing a great job, and then they're so tired the following week's training is not great. I would rather an athlete just came in and ticked off their training consistently over a period, and they're the ones who just steadily build that base fitness up. Don't look for quick results. Everyone in rowing is looking for the magic bullet, and I can tell you now there isn't one. It is just commitment to doing the basics and doing them consistently well. I think Doc hit the nail on the head with consistency there. I'd rather an athlete came in and did 6 sessions of 1 hour over the course of a week rather than did 2 sessions of 4 hours over the week. It's that just little and often, and then just building it up. And then as your fitness improves, then you can add a little bit more. And I think Doc made an important point there about the value of cross training. I think the less experienced athlete, junior athletes in particular, don't just do rowing. Don't just sit on an ergo. Don't just sit on a boat. Get out there, go and play rugby, go and play hockey, go and do something that keeps you fit, but is not just rowing specific. Because as you progress up through your rowing career, you'll find that it gets more and more specific. But you'll be able to take the load better because you'll have that training inbuilt. But when you're younger, when you're new to the sport, keep your training a little bit more varied and just build it steady, and don't expect to suddenly move on quickly. It takes years and years to build up that fitness.
Colin,
thank you.
Colin, just as we're obviously talking about that, we've had another question in there just around sort of training intensities. Maybe you might be able just to respond to that. What the proportion distribution of high and low intensity training, just as a follow-up to what you've just been discussing?
This is a great question, and this is where we might get some disagreement in the panel. Maybe everyone's wanting some, but it's a big debate right now. I'll tell you what we do at Edinburgh. We go very much for a polarized approach, and it fits into my last answer, which is long, low, steady miles. We try and do an awful lot of them, and we go down a route a bit like everyone's probably seen the popular books, the sort of 80-20 running, 80-20 triathlon. This idea that you do 80% of your training below the anaerobic threshold and then 20% above. We try and follow a fairly similar model in our program. We're not exactly on that, but we're roughly on that. We do a lot of low, steady mileage, rate 18 to 20, trying to keep the heart rate in that UT2 zone, which is around about roughly, we're talking about 70% of max heart rate. And then for 20% of our training, we're looking at just letting the intensity go up above the anaerobic threshold, working a little bit harder, pushing towards heart rate max. But I know that you'll probably get a much better sciencey answer from Tom on this, but that's certainly the way we go at Edinburgh, and it probably fits in with the idea of that long-term development, looking for an outcome, being really good in 2 or 3 years rather than trying to be quite good now. You will get better results, I reckon. If someone goes on and does a load of intervals over the next 4 weeks, and someone gets on and does a load of UT2, the guy who's done the intervals will probably go faster, but I bet you that guy doesn't go faster in 18 months' time.
Tom, did you want to come in off the back of that, or?
Well, Colin's given me credit for a better sciencey answer, so I might just take that and then pass it on to Lewis. But no, I fully agree. I think there is an element there of it depends, depending on who the athlete is, just because an 80-20 based program might not work for a young junior because they're probably not doing enough for that. A long, high mileage, low intensity program requires high mileage, which is probably not appropriate for quite a few athletes or members of the Scottish rowing community, and not available either. You might not have the time to train twice a day, 6 days a week. So there's probably, once you get sort of out of a certain threshold of can you do 9-10 sessions a week, if the answer is no, then you probably lift the amount of high intensity work, just because you're probably not hitting a critical number for minutes or miles in a low intensity training zone. But from the question before as well, where you can use cross training as much as you can, I think that's a huge thing, particularly for younger and newer athletes. Can't emphasize that point enough. And in particular, there are a lot of elite athletes even on the Olympic level that use a lot of cross training, either in certain sections of the year or throughout the year. it's not a thing. You know, being on a bike or going out running is not something to shy away from just because you think you're a great athlete that needs to develop. There's plenty of examples of the top scullers in the world, for example, that go sort of lumberjacking and cross-country skiing through the winter. You know, people like Mahe Drysdale, who's done Ironmans, used to do that, I think, through the back end of summer after the regattas and things like that. So there's loads of people that use that, and don't be afraid to do that year round, especially in Scotland when it's wet, windy and frozen a lot of the time.
I guess just a really relevant question at the moment, given that, you know, everyone's in lockdown in Scotland. One of our live questions this evening from Iain Summerside. Coming out of lockdown onto the water, what would be your training focus?
Well, good question. I anticipate it being quite a while away, so I've got plenty of time to come up with an answer. But just now, my kind of thought is I'm not trying to rush back onto the water. And when we do get back onto the water, my first port of call is not about really training. It's about getting people out in boats, having a bit of fun to start with, and then we may start building back. A lot of our training is based on kind of group training, and based on how things progress with the lockdown, we're going to be changing our model quite significantly. But really, for me, the focus is going to be enjoyment, starting to look at skill development, and basically just starting a new year the way that we always would. In a university program, we get new beginners in every year, we get new juniors in every year, and people leave. So we always start at the same point with the basics, tick the basics off, and then we gradually move on every year. So I think it's almost like we're just starting a new year with rustier people, basically.
Yeah, just quickly to back up Lewis there, like one, not in a rush, and two, when we do get back in water, it is just short, fun sessions. One, we probably get more people, or less people through our boathouse over more time, so it's going to have to be short and sharp. With that as well, we need to remember that we're going to be out of boats, out of wobbly hulls, and we're going to be on Argos, which are very one-planer, for the last 4 or 5 months. So actually stuff like back health, trunk health, core health is something which we should be thinking about now. Because when all the bans are lifted, everybody's going to be excited to get in the water, everybody's going to be excited to go fast again. I have a feeling that our athletes, our rowers, won't be conditioned enough to jump straight back in where they left off, and that's what we're going to have to be very, very careful about. I've noticed that over a 3-week Christmas break, let alone a 3 or 4 month lockdown break.
Yeah, I'll add in what we're probably thinking a little bit into, and I imagine most people are in a similar boat, excuse the pun, that we've all of my athletes have been given sort of quite physical based focuses. Obviously some of them are wanting to improve an erg score because that's all they've got to go on, but they've got things like trunk, hip movement, little sort of technical related aspects that they can work on at home. And the big thing that we've done before when we've been off the water for extended periods is just as soon as you get back on the water, make sure that your primary focus is just try and implement that into the boat. There's going to be, everything's going to be rusty, like Lewis and Iain have already said, and the boat's going to be a bit wobbly, but can you apply your new hip range in there? Can you apply these amazing new glutes that you've developed over lockdown into your stroke, and stronger shoulders, things like that? You've probably worked on some general athleticism, some fitness stuff, and just see if you can first off apply something positive to your stroke rather than clambering to think, oh god, how do I remember how to scull, which blade is which? Because everyone's going to have that problem. We've not seen a boat for a while, so think about what physical aspects that you've worked on now, or if you haven't planned something, plan something now that right, well, I needed to work on that beforehand, got no choice but to work on it now, and take that straight into the boat and apply that to improve your rowing, because you might be surprised to find out you can actually get quicker while not being in a boat, which seems to be the theme of my answers today.
It's definitely an opportunity, isn't it, for for us through this period to think about how can we get a competitive edge coming out the other side, in an area that we may not otherwise be particularly strong in. Okay, we're going to move on, and I did say earlier we're going to have a quick chat about weights. So we've had quite a specific question in about, I suspect, a sort of a full-time worker who trains once a day, 6 to 7 days a week, and they're asking how much emphasis should be placed on weights, and where's the strength of evidence to sort of support any view that you have. So Tom, you obviously mentioned weights earlier. Do you want to pick this one up?
Yeah, obviously I think it's widely known that obviously rowing requires sort of strength endurance, as well as a really big aerobic system. And this is sort of what I touched on before, that if you're not doing a huge program and you haven't got time for, like we said, 9, 10, 12, 14 sessions a week, you might lose a little bit of volume in that program, and you might do slightly higher intensity work. And that all depends on your experience. Obviously, if this is a sort of senior athlete who's working full-time versus a junior who's 14 and in school, their two programs will look very different. But I think weights is important. I think if you're only on 6 or 7 sessions a week, you probably don't want to go for big solely weight sessions. I would try and combine your sessions. You could do it in sort of a CrossFit style, where you're doing some weights and then some erging and then some weights and then running and things like that, more of a conditioning based session. But you can actually, instead of doing an 18k UT2, you can do some weights and then 12k on a bike, things like that. You can actually do 2 sessions in one, and I think there's quite a lot of power in doing that, just so that you can actually hit the variety of different sessions that you want to, because naturally, and I'm sure everyone else in the panel does, we sort of combine weights and probably some long aerobic sessions in the same day. If you're limited by the time you've got, try and put them together if you can. Obviously, you can't do the same volume. You can't just do 2 sessions back to back because you'll burn out, but you can adapt it that way, and it's so individual. Sorry.
I would just kind of echo Tom's points and actually add a little bit that I think rowers in general are very immobile. If you look at rowers compared to a lot of other athletes in different sports, we're immobile, and actually lifting weights or doing an S&C session, part of the focus from my point of view is about injury prevention. It's about general athleticism, and those things come hand in hand with mobility. So if you're an athlete which you're trying to get more mobile, you're trying to increase flexibility, you should probably be doing some form of S&C. And I'm not suggesting that you're going to go and lift a 200 kilo deadlift to increase your mobility, but there's plenty of exercises which you can do to enhance your mobility in the gym involved in an S&C session.
I'm just going to back up what Lewis said there. I think a lot of people automatically assume that we lift weights just to make the boat go faster, but actually the first principle of lifting weights is actually to make your body more robust, to be able to handle the rowing program and to be able to handle more miles in the boat and more miles on the ergo without breaking down. So it's more than just getting stronger in order to move the boat faster. It's getting stronger so that you can do more work in the boat and more work on the ergo and stay safe while doing it.
Okay, thanks for that. That's really helpful. What are the main traits, Colin? Colin, I'll come back to you first. What are the main traits? Obviously, you've worked with quite a few athletes over the years. What are the main traits that you look for in athletes that you're working with?
When you say, I presume you mean athletes, performance athletes? Is that
athletes that are aspiring towards competitive performances. That's
I guess the first point I'd make is that there's a place for everyone in rowing. It doesn't matter if you're small or heavy or light, or weak or strong. I think there's a place for you in rowing in the sport, and there's a competitive place for you in the sport. But I'll answer this question from the perspective of what am I looking for when I'm looking for what we describe as a performance athlete, which I would say is someone who's trying to achieve wins at a national level or achieve international selection. And the two biggest points for me would be attitude, number one, and then physicality after that. If you don't have the attitude to work hard and to commit and to learn, then it doesn't matter how talented you are. This is a very honest sport. You can't just be a natural talent and win. You've got to be able to train. So if you don't have the attitude in the first place, there's no point. I've actually got a little anecdote on, I'll try and be as quick as I can. The Sporting Giants program, which was a bit of an offshoot of Start back in the day in about 2009, 2008. I remember the coach at Leander was putting some Sporting Giants athletes through their paces, and he sent them on a run up the Henley track and back. And what he wasn't looking for the person who got back first. He was looking for the person who crossed the finish line and collapsed because they'd given it their all. Because that was the attitude test. How much are you willing to push yourself? Everyone on this call knows that this is a sport that demands an awful lot of application. So if you don't have that, don't bother, go and do something else. But there is an element, if you're going to be a performance athlete at the top end, there are exceptions, but you do have to look at the physical aspects. Do you have the anthropometrics? Do you have the frame? Do you have the capacity to perform physiologically? And I use the word capacity very deliberately there. Not necessarily pulling massive erg scores as a junior, but if they've got the frame and the capacity to train, you can train endurance into people, but do they have the frame that we can then build that training onto? So I think attitude number one, and then the physical aspects number two.
And Colin, if I was just to push it back in terms of what do you see as the main factor then that would prevent an athlete from progressing through that journey as a sort of competitive performance rower?
Again, it's probably attitude. I've seen a lot of very talented athletes drift out the sport because they just don't want to commit. They don't want to be in it for the long run. You get the odd person who can just make it happen in, say, 2 or 3 years, and that's great. But the ones who, I know examples on the GB senior team right now who spent 10 years as like a club rower, but kept chipping away, kept improving, and then they ended up at the Olympics because they were willing to keep putting in the time, keep improving, even if it's just incremental improvements. I mean, I'm going to make a fairly general point here, but what I've noticed about incoming students, I think students are more impatient for results these days. And I think that's a bit of a life thing as well. Everyone kind of wants achievement and they want it now. When actually we're a sport that doesn't really get achievement now. And if you want to reach that top end, you've got to be in it for the long game. And that's an attitude thing.
I like to back up Colin again. We're doing that a lot, but like top 2 answers, Colin's taking them. I just like to add a couple below that. Like just work rate, work ethic. Like you look at Ricky Hatton, he just worked the hardest to get where he was. That backs up Colin's attitude. And you can see that in different ways. It's just like, people that don't like to lose. That kind of comes under Colin's attitude point. Another one is, like, as coaches, we want people to be coachable, which is a bit of an open-ended statement as it is. But to me, that's just be prepared and then like be communicative. So if you're ready for your session, you're on time, you know what your session is, you will perform that session better. Like as coaches, we thrive off feedback. That feedback of how was your session, how did you find it, where do you think your areas to progress or get better are. Like that's what coaching is. Me just emailing out a training program, a bunch of numbers on it, that's not coaching. It's me taking that feedback and making a replan of that for the next time we come around to it. So yeah, coachability for me is communicative and just being curious about your sport. The boys underneath me, are you nodding?
Yeah, I would just agree exactly what you're saying. I think the commitment to training and commitment to the process that they're going through is vital. I think you can achieve your potential and you can achieve your aims in the sport without having any physicality. Like Colin was saying, there's a place for anyone in rowing. So you may not win an Olympic final if you're 5'1" and 5 kilos, right? But you can achieve your aim, whatever that aim is, by being committed, training well, and being coachable. So physicality is important in some regards, but the attitude is by far more important.
I'll probably just have to throw my 2 cents in here. My program's slightly different in that I have a strict physical limitations of what we're looking for. So obviously 5'10" and taller for the girls, 6'2" and taller for the guys. So sorry, had to put that one in there. But a big thing for me on sort of the soft skills, which I think for the most part they can be teachable and learnable. But one of the things that I can't give someone is motivation. And ultimately every aspect of whether it's coachability, whether it's attitude, things like that, there has to be a reason that you're doing something. There has to be not necessarily an end goal, but something that you're wanting to do. If you are halfway through the toughest interval session you've ever done, if you don't see a reason for doing that session and a reason for getting through it, if you're not motivated to do that and get something from it, put the handle down and get off. It's very much what I did when I left rowing and I realized intervals aren't for me anymore. I just like to cruise, do some steady state, watch some Netflix. And that's quite open, honest conversations that I like to try and have, is just that you've got to be thinking about what's the reason for doing this. And if you don't have one, then you probably need to reassess and either find one or find something else.
Okay, I'm going to try and move things along because we've had some great discussion here in training and programming. We've got a couple more I'm just going to finish off with, and the next one I guess will be a challenge for all of you is how do we go about guiding sessions that you're not present at? Now I know a big challenge for all of you is you always like to be at all of the sessions of your athletes, but bear in mind, I guess, across the rowing community we'll have volunteer coaches who'll be working in jobs, we'll people who won't always be able to be there. How do we get the best out of our athlete group when we're not actually able to be at the sessions?
Yeah, it's something which, when I started off coaching, I thought I'd be everywhere all the time, and that means my athletes get better. Not the case. Like, me being there all the time is me tired, and it's actually detrimental sometimes to the athlete's progress within that session. Just like, we use captains a lot in Glasgow. So we work closely with our men and women's captain, and then the seniors in that squad as well. So they just lead by example. They've been at enough of my sessions now to know what I look for, what I like to brief our sessions are, what the aims of the session are, and what they can get out of it. And I think actually putting that onus on our captains and senior rowers, a bit like Colin said when he's starting to learn how to coach it, it makes them think about what they're doing, why they're doing, how they're doing it, and they take more pride in it. And a lot of the times, if I come back from a weekend away, they've had the best sessions I had all season, and they're excited about it because they made it happen. They didn't look to me to make it happen. It was from within.
I think it's really important to. I think what this will show up is how good your planning is, how good your program is, and how good your briefing is. I'm sure many people on this call were on the Robin Williams chat, whenever that was, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, where he talked about the importance of a pre-session briefing and then a debriefing as well, where you set your goals. What's the goal of this session physically? What's the technical goal of this session? And then after the session, the debrief. Did we achieve those goals or not? Now, if we're not at the session, we can still provide a brief and we can still lead a debrief as well. So that's what I would set. I would set some technical outcomes for the session and some challenges. I would set some physical challenges as well, and then debrief. You can still do that remotely. Did you achieve those things? And it puts the onus on them to work through. As long as you've programmed written your program well and given them very clear instructions about what they're trying to achieve in that particular session, they can go and do that. And actually, a lot of the time, we all know this because we all coach. Well, maybe not Tom, but we all coach big squads, and we don't. If I've got 20 athletes on the water for 16K, I might only see them for 500 meters anyway. So they're spending a lot of that session on their own anyway. So as long as you've given them a good briefing and then you execute the debrief and they've learned something, I think you can still coach remotely and not be there.
Okay, I think I'm going to wrap up the sort of training and programming conversation, and we're going to move on to athlete transitions. Our planning this evening was something new, where we are running pretty much a little bit behind schedule, but hopefully everyone's happy to stick with us. So the last theme this evening was just around athlete transitions and looking at how athletes progress through the sport, from junior rowing into senior rowing, and then, quite often from university rowing into senior and masters rowing. So the first question I'll just kick off with, why is it important that we take a long-term perspective on our development as rowers?
Well, I think I can jump in here, touching on what Colin was saying earlier, is it's not a quick process. You can't just sit in not sit in a boat one day, sit in a boat the other, and suddenly be an amazing rower and have all the answers. So it's got to be a slow process, and anyone that's trying to make it quick isn't going to follow the long-term model. I think the challenges come when you're running a school program and you may be under pressure, or the athletes might be putting you under pressure to perform, and that can be challenging. I can appreciate that, but taking time to work through, I'm going to advertise again, the British Rowing Development Model helps to guide people through that long-term process.
We will try and send out some links to the rower development guide that Lewis is referring to, because I know he's mentioned it a few times now. Anybody else have a thought on that one?
Yeah, I can go with that. My program obviously solely based on long-term development, but I'll try and be diplomatic and say that actually a lot of it can depend on what your individual goals are. You may actually have you may actually only intend on being in the sport for 1 year. If you're, let's say, a post-grad student doing a 1-year course and you just want to go and have a bash at books in the summer. Shame if that was this year, but you know, it depends entirely on what your long-term goals are. In some instances, it may be completely open-ended. You may have no idea what your end goal is, and you're just happy to be here and want to see where it takes you. But if you're not planning on ending it short, then you probably should take a sort of more long-term view on it. Particularly just the way that I'm sure all of the coaches on this panel coaches were very basics driven. And there was a quote batted around in my start coaches chat this morning, which I'm going to completely ruin, but it was something called catapult coaching. The idea that you have to sort of get back to basics to project yourself forward. And that's a really big thing in sort of long-term development. You've got to really nail the basics. It's quite a simple sport in terms of there's not loads of different complexities to it. You don't have to understand, you know, every tactical move in chess or the way every Premier League football team plays. We just take strokes over and over. So you've got to be really good on the basics, and you can't try and rush and complicate that. It does just take time. It takes hours and hours of that sort of purposeful practice again.
I guess if I was to be a very slight, I agree with the idea of if you want to produce an athlete at the end of a conveyor belt who's the optimal athlete, then the long-term athlete development model is absolutely right. If I was going to be a slight dissenting voice, though, I think sometimes the model ignores the fact that athletes and to a secondary extent coaches want to achieve something. I've heard it spoken from some people who advocate a long-term athlete development model that juniors shouldn't race because it's not part of the physical development. Why are we in the sport? We're in the sport because we enjoy it. We enjoy racing. And maybe it's not fitting within the long-term athlete development model to go out and do 6x500 in a Cox 4 next to your mates, but it's fun and it keeps us in the sport, and it's why we do it. So I think that the science behind the long-term athlete development model should be looked at, but we've also got, the other thing is we always think, if I'm an under 23 coach and a coach at a university, I don't see the junior coach's job as passing on the athlete in the best possible shape to be good for my program. They also want to achieve things with their junior program, and sometimes those things don't match up. Sometimes they do, and a lot of it does. But to achieve things at junior, sometimes you maybe have to accelerate beyond what the long-term athlete model says in order to achieve those things. And I'll be exactly the same. So we're getting told by GB Rowing, we want our athletes delivered in a certain way. But our athletes have their goals when they're with us as well. And we as coaches and our programs have goals that might mean we go beyond that development model. So I can see how it works, but also it does slightly ignore the real part of the sport, the racing and the having fun. So take it with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point to wrap up on, Colin. I think it's important that, you know, all athletes in the sport are developed, you know, with the element of fun involved, and that's sometimes overlooked, as you say. I'm going to move things just over onto the live Q&A. Keith Robertson's had a question there for a wee while. What are you looking for in a junior rower who's moving from being a junior to a university rower? And it maybe comes in a little bit on that sort of topic that we've just been discussing. So Doc, do you?
Yeah, one of them, I know this might not agree with everyone, like just the patience. Like it's a transition from junior to university rower. It's not just a rower, like you're uplifting wherever you are now at school into what might be across the country, into another country, to then be on your own or, you know, live on your own for the first time. I think we can't forget that. That is difficult. That's difficult in any stage of life, let alone for the 17, 18-year-old in Scotland. For us, just go back to basics. What the basics is, make sure like you've got your preparation together. Make sure you're doing your uni work right, you're living correctly, and then training comes on top of that. When it comes to training, what you did with your old coach, your old program, might be a little bit different from what you're doing in your new program, your new coach. So let them know what's different, what they understand, what they don't understand. I think again, feedback's key in that one. Another thing is like rest. Like we can train all day if we want, but if we don't rest, recover, we're not going to progress. I think it's just letting junior coaches and actually juniors coming up knowing about that it's a full picture approach. I've been lucky enough to work with a couple of juniors, like good juniors, the last couple of years, and I say they're all very good at junior because they're all very, very strong in their own rights, in their own areas. I think what I've tried to do as university coach is maybe try and work out where they're less rounded or where you can make them a more rounded athlete. Like working on their weaknesses to bring them more well-rounded and robust into a university program before pushing them up that ladder again into maybe under 23 or beyond. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would agree with what Doc's saying. I think it's very easy for when you're a good junior athlete to think that you'll just walk straight into a university program and maybe be at the top of that group. But it's very likely that that's not going to be the case. So preparing yourself that you may not walk in and everyone looks at you and goes, oh my goodness, that's that junior that was really good. You'll probably walk in and people might not know who you are, and you've just got to be slow into the group. So don't come in like a bull in a china shop, pretending that you have all the answers. You've got to be there to learn from other people in the same way that they'll learn from you. So patience and kind of commitment to the program, I guess, is what I would look for in a junior progressing up.
One of the bits of advice, I guess, what we've learned at Edinburgh over the last 6 or 7 seasons is we've seen junior athletes come in, and actually in the first year they slowed down a bit, and that used to really worry me. I was like, what am I doing wrong? Why am I making this athlete slower? And there's multitude factors there. Some athletes, it's the living away from home, they're not eating well, they're not sleeping well. But actually, I think it's the change in training. So we have, I've chatted with my other coaches about this we call the second year bounce, which is an athlete who may dip a little bit in year 1 while they get used to the training and get used to the lifestyle. And actually, usually they're coming from a lower volume program onto a slightly higher volume program. And that, like I said earlier, it's a long-term process. It doesn't kick in straight away. But we've seen athletes who've dipped a little in first year, but they then shot on really quite well in the second year because that first year's training has had time to accumulate and they really kick on. So I think having a little bit of patience in your first year, not panicking if you go a little bit slower, that's okay. You're adjusting to life, you're adjusting to training, and have faith. The great thing about Scotland is they're with us for 4 years, whereas down south they're with us for 3. So we've got that extra year of time where we can just build that into them. So be patient, don't panic if you go a little bit slower. Longer term, you should go a little bit quicker.
It leads quite nicely into our next question, Colin, which is probably more targeted at the university coaches. I know we're coming up on 8:30. We've probably got another 2 or 3 questions if everyone's happy to hang on in with us. The question is sort of looking at how we kind of blend those beginner athletes that come in through the sport and are transitioning from beginner to senior within your club compared to sort of juniors who are coming in from experienced programs. So how do we manage those different transitions within a sort of university program?
Yeah, I'll kick off. I don't think there's actually a huge difference, if I'm honest. Again, in real world examples, we've had junior internationals that have come into our program and they've been pushed out of the first 8 by an athlete who was in our beginner program the year before. Because I think, a lot of very good athletes only start when they get to university anyway. So I don't think the transition's actually that different. So I'm not going to have a very interesting answer there. We don't do anything particularly special or anything particularly different if someone's come out the beginner program or they've come out of a junior international program. Tend to have got to the stage where they're at a pretty similar level by that stage.
Yeah, just to partially agree with Colin, if you're going to sort of accept that there's a difference in needs between a junior athlete transitioning up and a beginner transitioning into a senior squad, then you can probably accept that there are tons of individuals within those groups that are all entirely different. And there is just especially because you might say that a beginner from each of the programs, whether that's someone who's done 6 months with myself or Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, they're all going to look slightly different, and everyone within that group will look slightly different. So there's a big individual aspect to it, and that's where communication's been brought up quite a lot already, and actually discussing with coaches, okay, what do I need to step up to this level, and knowing where you're going as well. So knowing what program you're looking to go to or what you're transitioning into, and then what you need to develop to get into that, and then whether that's something that happens before the transition or whether it happens through and beyond the transition into those squads. There's lots of sort of moving parts there to communicate and sort of work around.
Thanks, Tom. So just moving on, this section's about athlete transitions, and we've had a bit of a discussion around junior to university. So the next question was around what opportunities are open in rowing after leaving university. And I'm also going to combine that with another question, which is, how do we encourage more student rowers into club, senior and masters rowing? So I guess the question here is, how do we keep student rowers rowing beyond university? And if they don't wish to row, are there other opportunities for them to stay in the sport? Lewis.
I think it's a really good question. I guess I'm going to share my opinion is I think a lot of people enjoy rowing at university level and school level because they get a lot of coaching. And I think one thing that my opinion is that I think clubs maybe don't invest as much in coaching as universities do. And I think part of that means that a lot of people may transition or may not transition from university into club because they struggle with that independent element of then moving into a club. And maybe that's our role to try and introduce better abilities to train, or have knowledge to train on their own. But I think I would maybe put it onto clubs to try and have a look at how they can provide for senior rowers better.
Yeah, just to very quickly from me. When I was rowing, it was the Scottish clubs, not the universities, winning the eights in the Scottish Champs. It was just a group of guys and girls out of a club who was around a coach. And that's something I think we can recreate again, like Lewis has touched on it. Athletes will follow coaches. Even thinking about our guys and girls who leave, I love them just leave up the river to GRC. Hopefully we've given them the tools of how to train and how to conduct themselves around sessions, and they can start again or start alongside us out of a town club in Glasgow. Selfishly, that'd be great. Every time I need a sub, you can just hop over the river, grab a guy or a girl who's rowed for us for 4 years and chuck them back in our boats. It is just building, it will come. If we send all our Glasgow alumni to one place to keep rowing again, then other people will join them. Colin?
I come in here and I've probably got two hats on in this as a university coach and also a little bit of work I do with the Scottish Rowing Competition Strategy Group. I think it's a real problem that, you talked there, Doc, about when the clubs used to beat the universities, and that's probably shifted. And that's due to one thing. That's investment in the university programs, investment in professional coaches, more training, equipment, etc. And I don't think we can go out there and say, right, clubs, you have to match that. I don't think that's entirely. I don't think they can. I just think the university rowing has moved on to a different level that's difficult to match. Not impossible, but difficult. And that means rowers that are coming out of our program and they're staying in Scotland, not exclusively, but if they're moving on to a club, they don't necessarily then want to race at a lower level, if you like. But what we have to look at, or they don't want to go and get beaten by their old university. And actually, we used to have this problem with people coming out of schools as well. So we'd get schoolboys that had rowed at Eton or Radley or, St. Paul's, and they were coming up to the Edinburgh program, and they were going, well, why am I going to row here? I'm going to row slower than I did at school. And I think that now happens between university and club rowing. Is you've done all this training, you've gone really fast, and then you're moving on to a club program and getting beaten by universities. So I think this needs to be looked at a national level about the competition structure. What competitions are we offering up that allow people to continue and stay in the sport that doesn't, we're a sport that requires you to train 12 times a week, and that still doesn't guarantee that you're going to win anything. So how can we change competition to make it more accessible for people who've done their 12 sessions a week program? They've now got a degree and they're moving on with their careers and they've got families and they don't have time or want to train 12 times a week. Can we create a competition structure that still gives them something back from the sport, but they train 5 or 6 times a week? And that's a problem we're wrestling with. That's a problem Scottish rowing are wrestling with, British rowing are wrestling with. And I think we solve it that way, by giving them that output that's still rewarding, because we can't just ask people that are moving into careers and have families to try and train 12 times a week to try and keep up with universities. It's just not going to happen.
Okay, I think that's a great sort of discussion point to end on, chaps. I think what I'd like to, certainly I think it's a good one for us to go away and for us to consider, and we're certainly open to working. If there's any club representatives on the webinar this evening, certainly very happy to have a sort of conversation offline about what we can do to support those sort of transitions of students leaving university who maybe want to continue with their rowing. Sorry, we're sort of 5 minutes or so over. Hopefully, as I say, we've had some really good discussion this evening. I just want to wrap up by thanking our coaching panel this evening. Hopefully you've appreciated everyone's honesty and insightful look at their own programs, drawing upon their own experiences. I think it's been really, really beneficial. I'm sure the coaches won't mind me saying this, but they are all on sort of social media. So I'm sure if you've any sort of questions as a follow-up to this, that you can probably drop them a direct message or whatever. And I'm sure they'll be happy to sort of pick those up. Just thank you to everyone at home who's tuned in from all over the country for this. It's been great to have you involved. We have sort of advertised this as a series, so we are looking to do one of these every 2 weeks. Our next Q&A session will be in 2 weeks' time with an athlete panel, and on that athlete panel we're going to have our rower of the year, Maddie Arlett, amongst others. So I hope you'll be able to join us for the next one of these. Until then, just like I say, stay safe and well, and hopefully we'll see you very soon. Thanks again. Cheers.